Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Kickin Aspergers. My name is Tim. I'm going to be your host. This is episode number 3, and today I want to discuss a little bit about celebrities and well known people that have possibly had Asperger's or been on the spectrum, whether they've been formally diagnosed by a doctor or after their life they've had psychologists and psychiatrists do case studies looking on upon who they were and whether or not they would actually fit into the autism spectrum. There's also a couple people that have been informally diagnosed, whether it's a family member or their own diagnosis, that they fall on the autism spectrum. Real quick, before I dive into that, I want to thank Corey. He mentioned something in one of his posts that he believes that he has kind of a two conditions. He has both OCD and Asperger's. Again, people that fall on the autism spectrum, that fall on the high functioning autism and with Asperger's, tend to have some obsessive compulsive traits. And it's not necessarily that they are obsessive compulsive. It's, at least for me, I'm not obsessive compulsive. I just prefer order in my life. Things need to be in a certain place, they need to occur at a certain time. And that, for some people, they consider that to be obsessive compulsive. So, again, without a proper diagnosis, I can't make that call without actually seeing what it is. I don't know if I could even say it's obsessive compulsive. But again, I do want to give a little disclaimer before I dive in here. I am not a medically trained physician or uh, student of any sort of medical sciences. Everything that I talk about is really some of my personal experiences and how I feel with them, how I interpret them. So again, today, episode number 3, I want to talk about some famous people that have been diagnosed with Asperger's or diagnosed on the spectrum. They've really moved away from using Asperger's as a particular diagnosis and just say that you are on the spectrum. In the past, there are numerous people. We can't really study them today because they aren't alive today. Therefore, we have to look at reports of how they acted. And some of those people, really, I want this video to showcase, if you ever feel like you are alone, that there have been very successful, very well known people that have fallen on the spectrum, or it is believed that they are on the spectrum or were on the spectrum in their life. And take that as you can still accomplish things in life. It is not a death sentence. It's not a sentence that a diagnosis that can prevent you from being successful. So, a few of the people that are no longer with us today that are believed to have been on the spectrum, have Asperger's, include, a lot of our founding fathers: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton. They were quite revolutionary, quite visionary, and they focused on getting things right. And I think that that's something, is a lot of people that are on the Asperger's end of the spectrum, they tend to have an intense focus and can really plan out things. Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton are a couple other people that are believed to possibly have had Asperger's. If anything, that's a great group of people to be associated with. If you have Asperger's, don't, again, those are people that are very well known. They've helped shape society today. They've helped, formulate the United States as it is today. They've helped, Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. Our mathematics with calculus and our sciences with physics would not be what they are today without these two individuals and their visions. Another couple of people that possibly had Asperger's, the great chess grandmaster Bobby Fischer. It's believed that he may have been on the spectrum. It's not real definite. Again, he died about 11, 12 years ago. So again, it's hard to diagnose someone who is no longer with us. But that may have been something that made him very good at being chess. And, he's one of the world's greatest, if not the world's greatest, chess grandmaster. Couple science guys: Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Of course, Steve Jobs, he passed away a number of years ago. Steve Jobs is an interesting one because there's a lot of people that don't think that someone who has Asperger's or who is autistic can lead a group of people. Both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates have started massive companies. I mean, Apple, Microsoft. They are massive, massive companies. And again, neither one of these people have really been officially diagnosed. It's just that what the tendencies that they tend to show uh, tend to lead people to believe that they may fall somewhere on the autism spectrum, possibly have Asperger's. There are also a lot of actors and people in Hollywood, or I shouldn't say a lot, a few really big names in Hollywood that have been diagnosed with Asperger's or have been self-diagnosed with Asperger's or falling on that spectrum. Dan Aykroyd is actually one of them. Dan Aykroyd, from movies such as The Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters. He was in Caddyshack 2 specifically, as well as he got his big start on Saturday Night Live. Um, he was diagnosed late in life, and that was actually something his wife made him go to the doctor to get evaluated, and it was found out that I believe it was in the 80s that he had Asperger's, that he was on the spectrum. With that, he loved ghosts and he loved law enforcement. I believe he studied criminology when he went to college, and that's where he created the Blues Brothers. It was really the opposite of law enforcement. The Blues Brothers having that kind of that rebellious personality that they had, with Jake being in jail, and Elwood, being Dan Aykroyd's player, breaking him out, and that, as well as he had a love for ghosts and law enforcement, and really the combination of ghosts and law enforcement is where he came up with the idea for Ghostbusters. It's real funny because if you read his stories, he travels around with a badge. Like, he wants to be a police officer in some capacity, so he travels around with a badge. He feels real awkward when he doesn't have that badge on him. It's not a real badge, it's a fake badge. It's just something that gives him some comfort, something that he really enjoys. Daryl Hannah is another one who has been diagnosed with Asperger's on the spectrum. Daryl Hannah is interesting because she was diagnosed a little bit later. No, she was actually diagnosed earlier in life. With females, women are not diagnosed nearly as frequently as men are, and they definitely aren't diagnosed at a young age nearly as frequently as men are, and that's because women in general, when developing the social cues, the social norm, social construct, women do a much better job of mimicking people around them, and therefore it helps cover up and disguise the underlying things that will really showcase someone who falls on the autism spectrum. So Daryl Hannah is, she is another actress, someone from Hollywood that lived life on the big screen, and quite honestly, she did not like it and has pretty much left all of Hollywood, and takes care of foster animals. I think she has a foster pig or a pet pig. Another person that came up was Tim Burton. Tim Burton, according to everything I've read, he has not been officially diagnosed as someone who's on the spectrum or someone who has Asperger's. He has not been diagnosed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a medical physician. He was actually diagnosed by his wife. Tim Burton has said that he has very much it's application and dedication for him, and he has an amazing sense of humor and imagination. And I think when you start combining his sense of humor and imagination, that's where you start seeing some of these very well-known movies that he has been a director or producer on, such as the Batman movies of 1989 and 1992. He was the director for Beetlejuice with Michael Keaton, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Alice in Wonderland, and even this last year, he was the director for Dumbo, the quasi animated movie. So, again, he's someone who, people with Asperger's, they tend to be very creative, very have very strong imaginations. A lot, at least I don't have a very good way of showcasing that. Again, you have Daryl Hannah and Dan Aykroyd and Tim Burton, who all are in Hollywood and have very creative roles that it's believed that they all fall on the spectrum. Dan Aykroyd, Daryl Hannah definitely have been diagnosed. Tim Burton, not so much. One person that comes up when you start looking for people that are well known for being on the spectrum is Steven Spielberg. Some people say yes, he is. Other people say no, he isn't. I can see both sides of it. Steven Spielberg does tend to be a little bit outgoing, but he is very, very creative, and very he's a very creative person. There's a lot of science fiction. I think people that tend to fall on the spectrum with Asperger's tend to be fascinated by science fiction, and that's why you see some of the movies that he has produced and directed: E.T., Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Minority Report. These are all very much very imaginative science fiction movies. Again, he hasn't been diagnosed. It's really split. If you go and read, does he have Asperger's? Does he fall on the spectrum? There's a large group of people that say absolutely. There are a large group of people that say not at all. So again, even someone who is well aged and has been around for a while, and we know about this, we know how to diagnose this, it's still difficult to really truly determine whether or not someone has Asperger's or falls on the spectrum. Again, with a lot of these, these people that are up on stage that are acting like Dan Aykroyd, Daryl Hannah, there are many people that fall at the upper end of the spectrum, the autism spectrum, have an Asperger's, that find acting and humor to be very liberating. They find it to be very thrilling. It allows them to do that. I also think that because of, going back to what I first talked about, some of the obsessive compulsive traits that people with Asperger's tend to have, I think it allows those of us that fall on the spectrum to really focus and become, hyper focused on that character and that role. And that's what makes us good. I cannot imagine, the original Ghostbusters having anyone else but Dan Aykroyd playing Dan Aykroyd. He was great in that role. Same thing with him in Blues Brothers. Absolutely fantastic in that role. And I think that's because the obsessive compulsive part of his diagnosis really allowed him to focus on that role and take over that role. Another person that came up, again, it's one of those things that it's really hard to tell whether or not he had Asperger's or fell on the spectrum, because unfortunately he committed suicide a few years ago, and that's Robin Williams. Again, there are a lot of people that fall on the spectrum that do have humor. Some of it's very dark humor. Some of it can be very dry humor. My humor kind of spans the spectrum. I have some friends that think I'm hilarious and should be a stand-up comedian. At times, a lot of it, I honestly, I don't think is all that funny. I just call it as I see it. But Robin Williams, there's some speculation that he may have fallen on the autism spectrum. And again, obviously he committed suicide. He suffered that depression. There are a lot of people that have a sense of depression when they are on the spectrum, because they do feel isolated. They don't socialize very well with other people. They feel very, very isolated, and I understand that. And And when it happened, admittedly for me, um, I understood why he did what he did. There are times that it is very depressing to feel as isolated as I do. That I don't feel like people truly understand who I am. If you should ever find yourself in that state where you are depressed, please, call a friend, call a family member, go out and just go for a walk or something like that. Really don't do the ultimate worst thing that you can do. Try to do something for help. Um, but really, all in all, that's a lot of it. A lot of these people, if you look at them, George Washington, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Bobby Fischer, the geniuses that are Tim Burton, possibly, Steven Spielberg, possibly the comedic genius that is Robin Williams. A lot of people that have Asperger's tend to call it the genius gene. And hey, look, we get our cameo from Roach. She decided to make a little stop by here at the very end. Say hi, Roach. Kind of. So, but again, I don't want you to think that because you have Asperger's that you cannot be successful. Obviously, there are many, many, many people that fall on the spectrum that have become very successful or household names. Again, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Apple, Microsoft, Dan Aykroyd with Ghostbusters, Robin Williams, the founding fathers. It is not an imprisonment. You can do things to really change the world if you put your mind to it. And I think that's really something that with us having the quote genius gene, that we have ideas that we just need to put into action. Don't be afraid to take your idea and try to do something with it. I know it's hard to socialize with people. It's hard to introduce your subject matter to people. But again, it is one of those, don't let that hinder you from changing the world with your latest and greatest ideas. So anyway, that is all that I have for episode number 3. I hope you enjoyed episode number 3. I hope that you like, share, and subscribe to the Kickin Asperger's channel. Love the viewer comments, the few that I've gotten. I love seeing that people are tuning in and watching this, and I really hope that I'm able to make an impact in your life. If you fall on the spectrum, you believe that you fall on the spectrum, or if you're a parent or sibling, family member, someone who falls on the spectrum, or if you're a coworker, I really hope that I'm helping shed some light on the unique characters that those of us that have Asperger's that fall on the spectrum have. We're just a little different, but we mean well, and just again, I just hope that I'm able to shed a little bit of light on who we truly are. In episode number 4, I'm going to talk about various subjects in school and subjects in life that we tend to excel at. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to drop them below. I will answer them either immediately, below your question, or in the next video. Again, thank you for tuning in to Kickin Asperger's, and I look forward to seeing you in episode number 4. Good day.